The voice recorder buried in Grand Canyon sand had been recording for 3 straight days, capturing every moment of Lisa and Robert Martinez's final camping trip. But when a hiker found it 8 years later and pressed play, the last thing he heard was Lisa's terrified whisper, "They're not park rangers, Robert. Real rangers don't carry those kinds of weapons." But what investigators couldn't understand was how the recorder had kept running for 3 days when its battery was only designed to last 6 hours. And when they examined the device more closely, they discovered something that would turn a missing persons case into something far more terrifying. Fresh fingerprints on the recorder that didn't belong to Lisa, Robert, or the hiker who found it. Fingerprints that had been left there recently, long after the couple had vanished. That chilling discovery clashed with everything people knew about Lisa and Robert. For 6 months, Lisa had carefully planned the trip, determined to make their 15th anniversary unforgettable. At 43, she'd spent her life shaping young minds as a teacher. Robert, 45, worked grueling hours in construction. Vacations were rare. Promises of someday always put off until now. Lisa wanted this trip to feel like starting over. Just us, the canyon, and no cell service, she told Robert with a smile. Like a real adventure. Robert laughed, pulling her close. "You know I'm afraid of heights, right?" Lisa teased him back. "That's what makes it an adventure." They prepared like kids before summer break. New camping gear stacked in the garage, maps covered in Lisa's neat notes. Robert practicing setting up the tent until he could do it blindfolded. It wasn't just a trip. It was about remembering what it felt like to dream together. On October 12th, 2015, they loaded their Honda CR-V and set off from Phoenix. Lisa carried one small item she never traveled without, her digital voice recorder. Normally used for work, this time she wanted to capture every laugh, every quiet moment, every sound of their adventure. "Future us will thank me," she joked, clicking it on as Robert drove. The first minutes captured were playful, filled with teasing. Lisa's cheerful voice later echoed back through the recorder. "Day 1 of our Grand Canyon anniversary adventure. Robert's pretending he's not nervous, but I see him checking the mirror every 5 minutes to make sure the tent isn't flying off the roof." In the background, Robert replied, "I just don't want to lose our shelter in the middle of nowhere, Lisa." She laughed softly. "That's why I love you, always preparing for disasters that never happen." The recording froze investigators when they listened years later, because Lisa was wrong. This time, the disaster was real. Robert's voice came through the recorder, steady but a little defensive. "I just want to make sure we don't lose our shelter in the middle of nowhere, Lisa." Her laugh followed. "That's why I love you, always planning for disasters that will never happen." But she couldn't have known just how wrong she was. At 3:30 p.m. on October 12, 2015, the Martinez couple finally arrived at Grand Canyon National Park. After checking in at the visitor center and collecting their camping permits, they drove into Mather Campground. Site 67 would be theirs for the next 5 nights, a small patch of ground surrounded by towering pines, with just enough privacy to feel like an escape. Lisa's recorder captured the excitement in her voice as they pulled in. "We're here. Site 67 looks amazing. Robert is already unpacking the car like we're moving in permanently. There's a family next door with little kids roasting marshmallows. This feels exactly like what I imagined." They spent nearly 2 hours setting up. Robert insisted on following the step-by-step tent manual, while Lisa carefully organized their supplies and food storage. By 6 p.m., the scene looked picture-perfect. Tent pitched, chairs around a fire ring, and bags neatly stacked against the picnic table. Dinner that evening was simple but unforgettable. Pasta, sauce, and garlic bread slightly charred from the camp stove. Lisa recorded again, her voice warm with happiness. "Robert made dinner, and he only burned the bread a little. Now we're sitting by the fire, and I swear I can see 1,000,000 stars. Tomorrow we hike into the canyon. Robert says he's not scared, but this is the 3rd time I've seen him read the safety pamphlet." A moment later, Robert's voice cut in. "I'm not scared. I'm being prepared. There's a difference." Lisa laughed softly. "Sure there is, honey." By 10 p.m., they were zipped into their tent, tired but full of anticipation for the adventure ahead. Lisa set the recorder on the picnic table, hoping to capture the canyon's night sounds. Owls, rustling branches, the distant hum of wind sweeping through the cliffs. What it captured instead was far more unsettling. Neither Lisa nor Robert noticed the shadows slipping quietly through the campground after midnight. Dark figures moved between the sites with deliberate precision, scanning, watching, searching. When the sun rose on October 13th, Site 67 looked untouched. The fire was cold, the tent stood perfectly staked, and every piece of gear was in its place. But Lisa and Robert Martinez were gone. The first to sense something wrong were their neighbors, the Johnson family. 8-year-old Emma had gotten up early for the bathroom, and when she returned, she ran straight to her parents. "The nice lady and man aren't at their tent anymore, but their car is still here," she said breathlessly. Her father, Tom Johnson, walked over to check. He called out once, then again, no answer. The Honda CR-V was still parked where the couple had left it. Their chairs sat neatly around the cold fire pit. The tent was zipped shut, undisturbed. It all looked completely ordinary until Tom noticed one detail that made his stomach twist. Everything looked ordinary until Tom noticed the one detail that froze him in place. On the picnic table sat Lisa's voice recorder. Its small red light blinked steadily in the morning sun. The device had been running all night. Tom picked it up. The screen showed a nearly dead battery, and the file length stretched far longer than seemed possible. His chest tightened. Without hesitating, he pressed stop, slipped the recorder into his pocket, and headed straight for the campground office. Park Ranger Sarah Mitchell had been working at Grand Canyon National Park for 12 years. She had seen everything: lost hikers, medical emergencies, tourists in over their heads. But when Tom Johnson walked in holding a recorder and said 2 campers had vanished from Site 67, Mitchell felt something she almost never did: genuine confusion. People didn't vanish from busy campgrounds. On remote trails, yes. In the desert backcountry, sometimes. But not here, surrounded by dozens of families, cars, and campfires, not without leaving a trace. Mitchell followed Tom back to the site and began a careful examination. The tent was zipped, no signs of a struggle. Chairs still circled the fire pit. Bags were neatly stacked. Even the car was locked, luggage visible inside. It looked like the couple had stepped away for a moment and simply never returned. But then came the detail that made no sense. No footprints leading away from the site. No scuff marks in the dirt. No packed supplies. No note. Mitchell radioed for backup, and within the hour a full search and rescue operation was underway. Teams fanned out across a 5-mile radius, combing trails and overlooks. Still, the real clue wasn't out in the desert. It was already in Mitchell's hand. When she pressed play on the recorder, she expected to hear harmless sounds of camping life. The crackle of firewood, quiet conversation, maybe coyotes in the distance. Instead, she heard something that made her skin crawl. Something that proved Lisa and Robert hadn't simply wandered off. They had been taken. The recorder had captured 18 hours of audio before finally dying, and what it contained would turn a missing persons case into one of the most disturbing investigations in the history of the Grand Canyon. At first, it sounded like any anniversary trip. Lisa and Robert talking softly, laughing about little things only they understood, making plans for the hike ahead. But at 11:47 p.m., everything changed. "Robert, did you hear that?" Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. "Hear what?" "Footsteps. Someone's walking around our campsite." For the next several minutes, the recorder picked up soft movement circling the tent. At first, it could have been dismissed as late-night campers, but the rhythm was different. These weren't casual footsteps. They were deliberate, controlled. Someone was trying not to be noticed. "Maybe it's just a ranger doing rounds," Robert whispered, though even he didn't sound convinced. Lisa shook her head. "At midnight? And why are they sneaking around?" The steps stopped directly outside. Inside the tent, their breathing quickened. Every sound in the canyon seemed to vanish, leaving only silence pressing in on them. Then a voice broke the stillness. Calm, steady, official. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, we need you to step out of the tent. There's been an incident in the campground and we need to speak with everyone." Robert exhaled in relief. "See, rangers." But Lisa didn't buy it. No flashlight, no names. Real rangers don't show up like this. And she was right to doubt. Years of teaching had sharpened her instinct for spotting when something about an adult's behavior felt wrong. And nothing about this midnight visit fit. Real rangers didn't hold quiet interviews at night. They traveled in pairs. They identified themselves immediately. Lisa raised her voice through the nylon wall. "Can you show us your badge?" Another pause. Too long. Then the same man, firmer this time. "Ma'am, we need you to exit the tent immediately." The tension was thick enough to feel. That's when Lisa's hand slid toward the small recorder. She pressed the button, her fingers trembling, determined to capture whatever came next. The device clicked, and her whisper bled into the microphone. "Robert, look at their shoes." Through a tiny gap in the zipper, she had seen them. Not ranger boots. Military-grade combat boots. Polished, expensive, out of place in a national park. "Rangers don't dress like that," she whispered, her voice cracking. Robert's face paled. "What do we do?" "We follow, but stay alert. And we keep recording." When they finally stepped outside, 3 figures stood waiting. Their faces were swallowed by shadow, but their gear, their posture, it was all wrong. These weren't rangers. Lisa spoke louder now, forcing the question. "Are you really rangers?" The tallest man tilted his head. "Ma'am, this is a security matter. You'll need to come with us." Her reply cut the air like glass. "Then show us your identification." And the recorder caught the silence that followed. Lisa didn't back down. "Making what more difficult?" "Your cooperation." Robert stepped forward, his protective instinct kicking in. "If you're rangers, then let's walk together to the station. If you're not, you need to leave, now." The reply cut through the night like a blade. "Mr. Martinez, neither of you will be going to any ranger station tonight." Lisa's voice, steady but edged with fear, came next. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man answered without hesitation. "We want you to come with us quietly. No questions, no resistance. Do that, and this will be much easier for everyone." Robert's panic spiked. "And if we refuse?" A long silence. Then the chilling response. "Refusal isn't an option." The device kept recording. For the next 20 minutes, the microphone captured every detail. 3 armed men surrounding Site 67, weapons visible, voices firm but cryptic. They never explained why. They never showed identification. But they made one thing clear. Lisa and Robert had no choice. "Pack only essential items," one ordered. "You'll be gone for several days." Robert snapped back, anger shaking his words. "Several days? For what kind of questioning?" "The kind that involves national security." Lisa wasn't fooled. "If this was national security, you'd have paperwork. You'd have contacted us officially. You wouldn't be sneaking around a campsite at midnight." For the first time, One of the men almost sounded impressed. "Mrs. Martinez, you're very perceptive. That's exactly why we need to talk to you." The recorder picked up zippers opening, bags being stuffed, fabric rustling. Lisa had slipped the device into her jacket, keeping it alive, her voice quieter now. "Where are you taking us?" "Somewhere safe." "Safe from what?" The answer made Robert freeze. "From people who might not be as patient as we are." That sentence changed everything. This wasn't about the park. It wasn't about rangers. It was about something much bigger. As they were escorted into the dark, Lisa leaned closer to the recorder, whispering with the calm of someone who knew this might be her last chance. "If anyone finds this, we were taken by 3 men claiming to be rangers. They had weapons, military gear. This happened at Site 67, Mather Campground, October 13th, around 12:30 a.m. Tell our families we love them." Her voice trembled only at the end. The recorder kept running. It captured the crunch of gravel under boots, the metallic slam of car doors, and finally the low, steady hum of an engine carrying Lisa and Robert Martinez into the unknown. Then, without warning, the recording stopped. Not because the battery had drained, not because Lisa or Robert had switched it off. It stopped because someone had realized Lisa was recording and ripped the device from her hands. That detail alone sent shivers down investigators' spines. But the real mystery wasn't what happened in that moment. It was what came after. Because if the recorder had been taken from Lisa in 2015, how had it ended up buried under a thin layer of canyon sand? 8 years later. And not just buried. Preserved, carrying fingerprints that were fresh. Fingerprints that couldn't have been Lisa's, Robert's, or the hikers who had stumbled across it. Someone had kept that device. Someone had listened to those recordings again and again, and then, for reasons no one could understand, someone had chosen to place it where it would be found. This wasn't just about Lisa and Robert anymore. The real question was, who had been holding on to the proof of their abduction all these years? And why had they decided the time had finally come to let it resurface? When Park Ranger Sarah Mitchell finished listening to the recovered audio, her hands were trembling. In over a decade of working at the Grand Canyon, she had seen rescues, accidents, even deaths. But nothing like this. This wasn't a missing persons case. This was a covert operation, a kidnapping carried out in plain sight. But Mitchell also realized something that made her blood run cold. The men on that tape knew the Martinez couple by name. They had moved through a crowded campground at midnight without raising suspicion. They had pretended to be rangers so convincingly that Robert himself had nearly believed them. Whoever took Lisa and Robert hadn't been outsiders. They had inside knowledge, access, authority. Mitchell contacted the FBI immediately, but she also made a decision that would later prove to be the most important of her career. She copied the audio files several times and stored those backups in secure, hidden locations. Her instincts told her this case would be dangerous, that the evidence itself might be targeted. She was right. Less than 24 hours after federal authorities had been alerted, the original recorder was gone, vanished from evidence storage. The paperwork claimed it had been formally transferred to federal custody. But when FBI agents arrived to pick it up, it wasn't there. The only reason investigators still had the Martinez recordings at all was because Mitchell had defied protocol and kept her own copies. From that moment, the search for Lisa and Robert Martinez became something entirely different. Not a missing hiker case, not even a simple kidnapping. It was a cover-up. Search teams swept through every inch of Mather Campground, checking for tire tracks, footprints, even scraps of disturbed fabric. They found nothing. Site 67 looked untouched. No signs of violence, no evidence of forced entry. To anyone walking by, it looked like Lisa and Robert had simply packed up and left. But investigators knew the truth. The canyon had swallowed them whole. But the silence of the crime scene spoke louder than any footprint ever could. Professional operators don't leave mistakes behind. The men who had taken Lisa and Robert knew exactly how to move, how to erase, how to vanish without a trace. Search efforts escalated. Helicopters carved grid patterns over the vast expanse of the South Rim. Ground teams combed through every trail, every overlook, every hidden cave that might conceal two missing campers. Rangers pushed themselves to exhaustion. And yet, after 2 relentless weeks, the result was always the same. Nothing. That's when Robert's brother, Miguel Martinez, arrived from California. Miguel wasn't just family. He was a retired police detective with 15 years of experience in missing persons cases. And when he listened to Lisa's recorder, the look on his face told investigators everything. "This wasn't random," he said firmly. "They were targeted. Whoever did this knew their names. They knew their site number. They had a plan to get them out without a soul noticing." Ranger Mitchell shook her head. "But why? They're ordinary people. A school teacher, a construction worker. No money, no enemies, no ties to politics or crime. What's the motive?" Miguel's answer was unsettling. "Sometimes ordinary people see extraordinary things, and when they do, they become a problem for very powerful people." The theory hung heavy in the air. If Lisa and Robert had witnessed something, when? They'd only been at the park for a single day. They'd set up camp, cooked dinner, laughed about garlic bread, admired the stars. How could that short evening have painted a target on their backs? The questions piled up, but the answers never came. Until 3 months later. That's when Ranger Mitchell received the call that cracked everything open. On the line was a man named David Chen, a former park employee who had left his job 5 years earlier. "I heard about the Martinez couple," Chen said, his voice low, almost cautious. "And I think I know what happened to them." Chen described things no tourist, or even most rangers, were ever meant to see. Men in military gear moving through restricted zones of the canyon. Late-night training exercises in places that were supposed to be completely off-limits. "I reported it more than once," Chen admitted. "But my supervisors shut me down. They said it was authorized government activity. They told me to stop asking questions if I wanted to keep my job." Eventually, Chen couldn't live with what he was witnessing. He quit. But before he left, he did something most whistleblowers don't. He kept meticulous notes, dates, times, exact locations, descriptions of the men he saw. And now, with Lisa and Robert missing, he was ready to hand those notes over. "The men I saw looked exactly like what you described from the recorder," Chen told Mitchell. "Military posture, professional training, moving like they owned the ground they walked on." When Mitchell went through Chen's handwritten notes, her blood ran cold. The dates and locations he had documented matched the very same area where Lisa and Robert had planned their second day's hike. They hadn't just stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. They were about to walk straight into the middle of it. As the investigation pushed deeper, the shape of a cover-up began to emerge. Park logs had been altered. Security camera files were missing entire nights of footage, and employees who might have noticed suspicious activity were suddenly gone, transferred to other parks, or resigning without explanation. Someone high up was cleaning house. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for: Lisa Martinez's instinct to record. That single decision created a record that couldn't be erased. The original device had vanished from evidence, but the audio survived. And then, impossibly, 8 years later, the device itself resurfaced, buried in sand as if someone wanted it to be found. The question gnawed at every investigator. Who had kept that recorder hidden for nearly a decade, and why choose now to let it surface? The answer, when it came, pointed to a truth far more dangerous than a missing persons case. Lisa and Robert hadn't just interrupted a secretive government training exercise. They had uncovered something powerful people were willing to kill for. And someone, somewhere, had risked everything to make sure their story didn't stay buried forever. That someone was Marcus Chen. A geology professor at Arizona State University, he had been hiking alone in the Grand Canyon for more than 20 summers, cataloging formations and collecting samples in places tourists never set foot. On July 15, 2023, Marcus stopped to rest in the shade of a sandstone boulder 3 miles from the main trail. He dropped his backpack, sat down, and stretched his legs across the hot sand. That's when his boot hit something hard. At first, he thought it was just another rock, but when he brushed the sand away, he froze. It wasn't stone, it was plastic. A sealed bag. Inside was a small device that didn't belong in the middle of the desert. Marcus Chen had just uncovered the voice recorder. And unlike the people who buried it, he wasn't about to keep it a secret. Chen's first instinct was simple: hand the device over to park authorities. That's what protocol demanded. But as he sat in the shade of the canyon wall, alone with the desert wind, curiosity gnawed at him. He pressed the play button. A woman's whisper, raw with terror, crackled through the speaker. "They're not park rangers, Robert. Real rangers don't carry those kinds of weapons." The voice froze Chen in place. He remembered that voice, not the woman herself, but the case. The Martinez couple, missing since 2015. For weeks, their faces had been splashed across news reports and television specials. Then, like so many disappearances, the story had faded into silence. But now, 8 years later, Chen was holding the evidence in his hand, a recorder buried where no one should have found it. The questions hit all at once. Who had kept this for nearly a decade? Why bury it here, of all places? And why now? Chen couldn't stop listening. He spent the rest of the day hiking with earbuds in, absorbing every word captured on that device. The deeper he went into the recording, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a random abduction. The kidnappers had known Lisa and Robert's names. They had walked straight to their tent with a rehearsed story about a campground incident. They had weapons, discipline, and resources that screamed military precision. This was organized, professional, and it reeked of government ties. But then Chen noticed something else, something far more disturbing. The men weren't just outsiders pretending to be rangers. Their conversations, their terminology, even the clipped way they spoke, it reminded Chen of people he knew. Federal employees, men he had worked alongside in field operations and research projects over the years. Some of those voices were familiar. Too familiar. That's when the truth began to dawn on him. The Martinez case hadn't been shut down because of lack of evidence. It had been shut down because the perpetrators were the evidence. People with badges, clearances, and the authority to bury the truth. Chen realized he was holding proof of a government-sanctioned crime, and with that realization came a chilling certainty. If he turned the recorder in, it would vanish, just like the first one had. And this time, no backup copies would survive. For the first first time in his decades of hiking the canyon, Marcus Chen felt truly unsafe because the question wasn't just what had happened to Lisa and Robert. The question was what would happen to him now that he knew the truth. If Marcus Chen kept the recorder, he was guilty of withholding evidence in a federal investigation. If he turned it in, it would vanish, just like it had before. Either way, he was trapped. So he chose a third option. Chen duplicated the recordings, storing copies in multiple secure locations, and quietly began his own investigation. What he uncovered over the following weeks revealed something far darker than a random disappearance. The Grand Canyon, he discovered, wasn't just a national park. It was being used as a training ground for classified government operations. Remote sectors of the canyon, off limits to the public, were serving as staging areas for activities that demanded total secrecy. Anyone who stumbled too close became a liability, and that's exactly what Lisa and Robert Martinez had done. Their anniversary trip had placed them directly in the path of a scheduled exercise. The response had been swift and merciless. They hadn't just been kidnapped, they had been eliminated. But the most chilling revelation came when Chen learned why the recorder had resurfaced after all these years. The fingerprints found on the device matched a former park ranger, Thomas Walsh. Walsh had vanished from his post 3 months earlier, leaving behind what was described as a suicide note. In that letter, he admitted involvement in the Martinez kidnapping and confessed his guilt over helping to cover it up. But Walsh's body was never found. Chen began to suspect the suicide had been staged, not to bury Walsh's shame, but to silence him before he could speak. And the recorder. That had been Walsh's insurance policy. He had kept it hidden for 8 long years. When his guilt finally became unbearable, he ensured the evidence would surface, even if he never lived to see it. For Chen, the meaning was clear. By unearthing the recorder, he had inherited Walsh's burden. He was now the next link in a chain of people who knew too much. People marked for disappearance, and the signs came quickly. Strange cars loitering near his street, silent phone calls at night, email accounts suddenly breached. Subtle, but unmistakable. The same forces that had erased Lisa and Robert were circling him now. But unlike the Martinez couple, Chen wasn't blind to the threat. He anticipated it. Before the shadows closed in, he distributed copies of the recordings, sending them to journalists, lawyers, and law enforcement contacts well outside official channels. If something happened to him, the truth wouldn't vanish. For the first time, Lisa and Robert Martinez had a chance at justice, even if delivering it cost Marcus Chen his life. If something happened to Marcus Chen, the truth about the Grand Canyon conspiracy would not die with him. He had seen to that. Copies of the recordings were scattered across the country, hidden in places no one could erase. On August 3rd, 2023, Chen's fears became reality. His phone rang just after dusk. The voice on the other end was steady, cold, and chillingly familiar because he had heard it before. Not in person, but on the recordings he had listened to over and over again. "Professor Chen," the caller said, "you have something that belongs to us." Chen's grip on the phone tightened. He answered without hesitation. "I have something that belongs to the families of Lisa and Robert Martinez." There was silence for a beat. Then the man spoke again. "Those people are dead, Professor. They died 8 years ago because they couldn't leave well enough alone. Don't make the same mistake they did." Chen had already chosen his path. "The recordings are already public. Killing me won't change anything." Another pause. Then, in a tone that felt more like a promise than a threat, "We'll see about that." The line went dead. The next morning, Chen went for his daily jog in the Arizona desert, just as he had every day for years. He never returned. His body was never recovered. But within weeks, the voice recordings he had duplicated began surfacing, first with independent journalists, then across major news networks. What followed was the investigation Chen had always known was possible, but had never believed he would live to see. The results were staggering. Federal inquiries revealed that the Grand Canyon, one of the most iconic and protected natural landmarks in the world, had been used as a staging ground for covert training exercises, intelligence operations, and activities that violated multiple national park protections. The Martinez case was no longer a story about two missing hikers. It had become evidence of a systemic corruption buried under layers of secrecy. Several officials were arrested. Careers ended. But the men who had physically taken Lisa and Robert Martinez were never identified. Too many names had been redacted. Too many files had been destroyed. The classified nature of the operations provided a shield for those who had carried out the kidnapping. For the Martinez families, the revelations offered painful answers, but no peace. Lisa and Robert were declared dead by federal decree. Their families now knew what had happened, but their bodies remained missing. The closure they deserved never came. And as if history was determined to repeat itself, even the most important piece of evidence, the original recorder that had resurfaced after 8 years, vanished once again. Logged into federal custody scheduled for trial submission, and then gone. No explanation. No trace. The only reason the truth survived at all was because Chen had taken precautions no one else dared. His copies became the last unbroken link in a chain of evidence that powerful people had tried again and again to erase. Even today, no one can explain why the Grand Canyon continues to give up fragments of its buried secrets. Most visitors never notice. They hike the trails, take photos at the overlooks, and go home with memories of one of the most breathtaking places on Earth. But every so often, a hiker strays off the beaten path and finds something strange. A rusted piece of military equipment, a recording device half buried in the sand, personal belongings from people who were officially listed as never found. Some of these discoveries never reach the public. Evidence disappears into the same black holes where the Martinez recorder vanished. But a few, just enough, make their way into the light, fueling rumors that the canyon is still being used for operations the government refuses to acknowledge. And with each new discovery, one question resurfaces. How many more people vanished here, their cases written off as accidents or misadventures, when in reality they had stumbled into something they should never have seen? Lisa and Robert Martinez were two of those people, ordinary school teachers from Phoenix who just wanted to celebrate their anniversary under the stars. Instead, they became part of a story larger than themselves, a story so dangerous that men with federal clearance were willing to kill to keep it hidden. Marcus Chen knew it, Ranger Sarah Mitchell suspected it, and Thomas Walsh, the ranger who confessed in his suicide note, had tried to reveal it before he was silenced. Together, their fragments of truth painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. The Grand Canyon was more than just a natural wonder. It was a stage where lives could be erased, where secrets could be buried, and where justice was always one step behind those who controlled the narrative. And yet, those secrets don't stay buried forever. The canyon has a way of pushing evidence back to the surface. The voice recorder was one example. The notes Chen had hidden were another. And rumors persist that Walsh left behind more than just a suicide note, that somewhere, hidden in the canyon's vast wilderness, there are files, photos, and names that could blow the cover off the entire operation. Whether that evidence will ever be found is another question. Today, as millions stand on the edge of the South Rim, looking out across a landscape carved by time, most have no idea of the darkness woven into its history. But for those who know the Martinez story, the canyon isn't just beautiful. It's haunted by unanswered questions, by missing voices, by the silence of people who never came back. Lisa and Robert went to sleep expecting to wake up to a sunrise over red cliffs and endless skies. Instead, they became shadows, swallowed by a system designed to forget them. And maybe that's the final truth of the Grand Canyon. Its silence is not empty. It's heavy, heavy with the weight of the secrets still buried there, waiting for the next person brave or unlucky enough to uncover them.